style, pacing, and articulation almost exactly as in the source material. In the winter of 1895, a loan insurance investigator from New York uncovered something that would rattle the very core of American commerce. Concealed inside the account books of Pennsylvania's most respected insurance firm was proof of the most intricate mass murder plot ever recorded in our country's history. Across more than 36 years, the Eternal Life Insurance Company had deliberately arranged the deaths of over 2,000 men, women, and children, purely for profit. The Blackstone family, respected pillars of their community and regular church attendees, had transformed murder into a refined craft and insurance fraud into a vast empire constructed on blood. What Thomas Henley discovered amid those icy Pennsylvania hills went far beyond mere financial wrongdoing. It was a calculated genocide masked as legitimate business, where human lives amounted to nothing more than figures on a ledger. Before we dive deeper into the tale of the Blackstone family and their lethal empire, I need to ask you something. This channel isn't meant for everyone. It's only for those courageous enough to confront the darkest chapters of American history. If you're prepared to reveal secrets that powerful figures fought desperately to bury forever, then go ahead and smash that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a comment telling me which state you're tuning in from. I have a strong feeling this story will strike closer to home than you might imagine. The truth of what took place in those Pennsylvania valleys from 1859 to 1895 was so horrifying that, even now, certain records stay locked away in basement archives, bearing warnings that few people dare to disregard. The year was 1859, and the rolling hills of south-central Pennsylvania were undergoing explosive growth. The finding of rich coal deposits along with the rapid spread of the Pennsylvania Railroad had turned sleepy farming villages into thriving industrial hubs almost overnight. Nestled between the Susquehanna River and the Appalachian foothills, Mill Creek Township suddenly found itself right at the center of this dramatic change. It was into this promising landscape that Moriah Blackstone arrived, accompanied by his two younger brothers, Isaiah and Jebodiah. The Blackstones claimed they came from Connecticut, although their accents hinted at something more unusual, perhaps faintly European. Yet no one could pinpoint it exactly. To the decent folks of Mill Creek Township, however, what mattered wasn't the brothers' origins, but what they carried with them: capital, ambition, and an almost uncanny grasp of human nature. Moriah, the eldest at 42, carried the kind of commanding presence that made men pay attention and women flush. His steel, gray eyes appeared to look straight into a person's soul, reading their deepest fears and desires with unnerving precision. Isaiah, aged 38, was the numbers expert, rail-thin, with fingers that moved over ledger pages like a pianist's over piano keys. The youngest, Jebodiah, just 35, acted as the family's public representative. Gifted with a warm, disarming smile and a firm handshake capable of selling ice to Eskimos, the brothers swiftly rose in the township's social order. They bought the grandest house on Elm Street, an imposing 3-story Victorian once owned by the late Judge Morrison, and promptly began hosting lavish dinner parties for the town's most influential residents. Moriah joined the Rotary Club, Isaiah took the treasurer position at the Merchants Association, and Jebodiah began teaching Sunday school at the First Presbyterian Church. But it was their new business venture that truly captured the community's attention and trust. On October 15, 1859, the Eternal Life Insurance Company opened its doors in a modest Main Street storefront. The timing could hardly have been better. Pennsylvania's industrial surge had produced a fresh class of working families with reliable incomes, yet dangerous occupations. Coal mining, steel making, and railroad building paid well, but they also provided plenty of ways to die young, leaving behind widows and orphans with nothing but sorrow and empty cupboards. The Blackstones understood this fear on a deep level and shaped their sales pitch with surgical accuracy. Life insurance, they explained, wasn't merely a financial tool. It was a moral duty. Any man who failed to secure his family's future was no better than one who deserted them while still alive. For just $2 a month, less than most men spent on tobacco, a worker could ensure his family would never face poverty, regardless of what deadly fate might await him. The coverage was astonishingly generous. A typical worker earning $15 weekly could buy a $2,000 policy, more than 6 years of wages. Even more remarkably, the Blackstones provided immediate coverage, no waiting period, and only the most basic medical checks. Other insurers demanded intrusive physical exams and mountains of paperwork, but Eternal Life made the entire process almost embarrassingly straightforward. Trust, Morai would declare during his Merchants Association speeches, forms the bedrock of all commerce. We trust our neighbors to be truthful about their health and situation, and they trust us to keep our promises when tragedy arrives. The community embraced this philosophy completely. By Christmas 1859, Eternal Life had signed up over 300 families just in Mill Creek Township. By the next summer, commission-based agents were selling policies across Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio. The Blackstones' success appeared to confirm everything Americans cherished about opportunity and honest labor. They had arrived as complete strangers, yet, through innovation and devotion, built a flourishing enterprise that genuinely addressed their community's needs. Local newspapers ran glowing profiles of the brothers, lauding their business skill and civic spirit. What went unnoticed were the subtle details that, looking back, should have triggered warning bells. Why did the Blackstones settle claims with such speed, often delivering cash to grieving families within days, when other companies dragged the process out for weeks or months? Why did their agents linger so long in local saloons, buying drinks for miners and rail workers while probing details about shifts and safety rules? Why did Jabidia always seem to learn of industrial accidents before the newspapers? Most baffling of all, why did the Blackstones keep such exhaustive records of policyholders' daily routines, work schedules, family ties, and financial troubles? Isaiah's office held filing cabinets stuffed with details far beyond what any normal insurance firm would require. Yet these questions would remain unasked for many years to come. In 1860, the Blackstones were simply the most prosperous businessmen in Mill Creek Township, respected community leaders who had solved one of working-class America's greatest fears, the terror of leaving loved ones destitute. The first death came on a frigid February morning in 1861, just as the nation began tearing itself apart over slavery and states' rights. February 14th, 1861, Valentine's Day, broke cold and gray in Mill Creek Township, with temperatures near zero and a wind that sliced through heavy wool coats like a knife. The Susquehanna Iron Works had been running at full tilt for months, filling government contracts as the country prepared for war. Hinrid Mueller had been on the night shift in the Foundry, tending the enormous furnaces that converted raw ore into steel destined for cannons and railroad tracks. At 34, Hinrich was among the most seasoned men in the Foundry, a German immigrant who had mastered his trade in Pittsburgh's industrial mills before settling in Mill Creek Township with his wife, Anna, and their 3 young children. Hinrich had been among Eternal Life's earliest customers, persuaded by Jabidia Blackstone's heartfelt Sunday school talk about a man's responsibility to protect his family's future. The 2000 policy had seemed like a fortune to someone earning barely $12 a week. Anna had wept with relief when Heinrich first showed her the documents, knowing that whatever happened, their children would be spared the crushing poverty she had known growing up in Bavaria. What occurred in the early hours of February 14th would be recorded in the coroner's report as a tragic industrial mishap. Witnesses, said Heinrich, was adjusting the mechanism, controlling the flow of molten iron from the main furnace to the casting molds. The lever system had been troublesome for weeks, sometimes jamming, sometimes releasing too suddenly. Yet the foundry owner, Samuel Hartwell, had insisted repairs could wait until spring. Around 2:47 a.m., disaster struck. Thomas O'Brien, stationed nearby, later told investigators he heard Heinrich curse in German, followed by the screech of metal grinding on metal. When he looked up, he saw Heinrich wrestling with the main release lever, apparently stuck in the closed position. Furnace pressure was rising dangerously. Everyone could hear the ominous groaning of the containment chamber. He was trying to bleed off the pressure by hand. Thomas told the coroner, pulling that lever with everything he had. I could see the sweat on his face even in that freezing foundry. Then, suddenly, the mechanism gave way all at once. What followed was a scene of pure horror, superheated metal, and human suffering. The release didn't simply open. It shattered, unleashing a flood of molten iron across the floor. Heinrich, directly in its path, died instantly. But the cascade didn't stop with one victim. The molten flow ignited a stack of lumber stored near the furnace, and the resulting blaze trapped 2 more workers when a support beam collapsed. 3 men dead. 3 eternal life policies. 3 families about to receive swift payment from the Blackstone brothers. Yet the details that surfaced in the following days painted a picture both heartbreaking and strangely convenient. First, the faulty lever. Samuel Hartwell swore his maintenance foreman, Jacob Walsh, had inspected the system just 3 days earlier and declared it safe. But when investigators sought Walsh, they learned he had left town suddenly on February 12th, citing a family emergency in Philadelphia. He was never seen again in Mill Creek Township, and letters to the Philadelphia address were returned undeliverable. Second, the timing of the accident. The night shift usually had 6 men, but on February 14th only 4 showed up. 2 had called in sick with influenza, though both were later spotted in excellent health at McGinty's Tavern, celebrating their lucky escape from what they called a close call. Third, the lumber storage. Foundry workers insisted flammable materials were never kept near furnaces. It was the most fundamental safety rule in their hazardous trade. Yet that night, a full cord of seasoned oak had been stacked exactly where molten iron would pour if the release mechanism failed catastrophically. Most troubling was the Blackstone's own response. While bodies were still being recovered, Jebediah Blackstone arrived at the foundry, claiming he'd heard the explosion from his home 3 miles away. He immediately took charge of notifying the families, personally escorting the widows to identify their husbands' remains. By sunset on February 14th, Isaiah Blackstone had visited all 3 widows, delivering immediate full cash settlements. It's what Heinrich would have wanted, he told Anna Mueller, pressing $2,000 in gold coins into her trembling hands. A swift settlement so you and the children face no further hardship during this grief. The community admired the Blackstone's compassion and efficiency, while other insurers might stall claims for months, demanding investigations and second opinions. Eternal Life treated policyholders like family. The rapid payouts were viewed as proof of the brothers' Christian values and business honor. Only one person seemed disturbed by the suspicious circumstances surrounding the foundry fire. Dr. Elias Crawford, Mill Creek Township's physician and county coroner, had examined hundreds of industrial accident victims over 20 years. He knew the physics of molten metal, burn patterns, and how machinery failed under stress. What he observed in the wreckage didn't align with his experience. In his private journal, Dr. Crawford noted that the lever mechanism had failed in a very particular manner, showing file marks and chemical itching that indicated deliberate structural weakening. The lumber placement was equally suspicious, stacked to ensure maximum fire spread if ignited. Most disturbing were the bodies. Heinrich Mueller's injuries matched direct exposure to molten iron, but the other two victims showed signs of smoke inhalation preceding the burns, suggesting they had been unconscious or incapacitated when the flames reached them. Dr. Crawford recorded his concerns meticulously. But when he tried to share his findings with the county sheriff, he learned the official investigation had already been closed. Ruled an industrial accident due to equipment failure and worker negligence, with no further inquiry planned. The speed and finality of that ruling struck Dr. Crawford as highly unusual, but he was a doctor, not a detective. He filed his notes privately and returned to caring for the living. What Dr. Crawford didn't know was that Sheriff Marcus Doherty had received a private visit from Moriah Blackstone on the morning of February 15th. The brief meeting, held behind locked doors with drawn curtains, ended with the sheriff receiving $500 in cash and Moriah receiving assurance that the Foundry fire would be forgotten as swiftly as possible. This kind of transaction would be repeated many times over the coming decades, though the amounts would grow much larger as the Blackstone operation expanded and their hunger for profit grew insatiable. The three widows from the Foundry fire used their insurance money to move to distant cities, hoping for fresh starts far from the painful memories of Mill Creek Township. Anna Mueller relocated to Philadelphia with her children. Margaret O'Brien took her family to Pittsburgh. Sarah Thompson returned to relatives in Ohio. None would live to see Christmas. Had the three widows died in Mill Creek Township, suspicions would have arisen immediately. Scattered across 3 different states, however, their deaths appeared as nothing more than cruel coincidences in lives already touched by tragedy. Anna Mueller was discovered dead in her Philadelphia boarding house on September 3, 1861. The landlord found her after other tenants complained of a terrible smell. The city coroner ruled it accidental poisoning, apparently from a patent medicine containing lethal mercury. Her 3 children, aged 6, 8, and 11, were found dead in their beds, victims of the same tragic error. Margaret O'Brien died in Pittsburgh from a supposed gas leak in the modest house she'd bought with her husband's insurance money. She and her 2 young sons were discovered by neighbors after missing Sunday services. Police noted the kitchen gas valve had been left open, apparently by accident, filling the home with deadly fumes while the family slept. Sarah Thompson survived longest, until November, before succumbing, along with her 4 children, to what Cleveland doctors called unusually rapid and virulent consumption, tuberculosis. 13 people dead. 13 lives once protected by eternal life policies, then extinguished within months of receiving their settlements, but separated by hundreds of miles and different jurisdictions. The pattern stayed invisible to authorities, with no reason to link tragic accidents in Pennsylvania to gas leaks in Pittsburgh or disease outbreaks in Cleveland. Meanwhile, the Blackstone brothers continued building their empire with methodical precision. By the end of 1861, Eternal Life had expanded into Ohio, West Virginia, Maryland, and Virginia. They employed over 50 agents across 5 states, each trained in the Blackstone method of identifying and recruiting ideal customers. According to the agent manual Isaiah had written, the perfect customer was a working man aged 25-45, with a dangerous occupation, a loving family, and no powerful connections who might demand answers if he died unexpectedly. Coal miners were ideal. Railroad workers were excellent. Factory hands, foundry workers, and construction laborers fit the profile perfectly. Farmers, shopkeepers, and professionals were generally avoided, unless they had some other appealing trait, such as a gambling habit or drinking problem, that might explain a sudden demise. The manual, later found in Isaiah's personal safe, contained detailed instructions on gathering intelligence about potential clients. Agents were taught to frequent saloons, barber shops, and boarding houses, engaging in casual conversation to uncover work schedules, family ties, debts, and personal habits. A successful agent, the manual stated, knows his customers better than they know themselves. He understands their weaknesses, fears, routines, and community connections. Knowledge is the foundation of all successful insurance underwriting. The manual also included more disturbing sections on identifying potential complications. People who might ask difficult questions after an unexpected death. Physicians, lawyers, journalists, law enforcement, and prominent citizens capable of demanding thorough investigations. For each type of complication, specific neutralization strategies were outlined. Some could be bribed, others intimidated, and a few might require more permanent solutions. By 1863, the Blackstone operation had evolved far beyond simple insurance fraud. They had built a vast network of corrupted officials, hired killers, and cooperative witnesses spanning multiple states. Sheriff Doherty in Pennsylvania had been joined by police chiefs in Ohio, coroners in West Virginia, and judges in Maryland, all discovering that cooperation with the Blackstones was far more profitable than honest law enforcement. The actual killings were performed by a carefully chosen team of specialists, each expert in creating accidents that could fool superficial investigations. There was Patrick, the Torch McGillicuddy, an Irish immigrant capable of making any building burn in a way that appeared accidental. Samuel, Doc Henderson understood poisons and chemicals with the precision of a trained pharmacist. Marcus, the engineer, Kowalski could sabotage industrial equipment so expertly that failures looked like natural wear and tear. These men were paid substantial fees, typically the $100 to $500 per assignment, drawn from a fund that generated thousands in profit from each successful claim. The economics were brutally straightforward. For every dollar spent on murder, the Blackstones earned at least $4 in insurance payouts. More importantly, systematically eliminating widows and surviving family members ensured no living witnesses remained. Dead men couldn't testify about suspicious conversations with agents. Dead widows couldn't hire lawyers to investigate odd circumstances around their husbands' deaths. Dead children couldn't grow up with lingering suspicions about the tragedies that took their parents. It was a perfect system, refined over years of practice and shielded by an apparently impenetrable wall of corruption. The only limitation was scale. By 1865, Eternal Life was processing over 200 death claims annually across 6 states, even accounting for genuine accidents and natural deaths among policyholders. Their customers' mortality rate was nearly 3 times the industry average. Statistical analysis, however, was still a young field in the 1860s. Most insurers relied on crude actuarial tables, incapable of detecting sophisticated fraud patterns. The few mathematically skilled professionals who might have spotted the anomalies were either employed by the Blackstones or persuaded to look elsewhere. Dr. Elias Crawford, still serving as Mill Creek Township's coroner, had begun to suspect something terribly wrong with Eternal Life insurance. His position gave him access to death records across multiple counties, and he had started keeping a private database of suspicious deaths involving eternal life policyholders. By 1867, his files contained evidence of 47 deaths, with unusual circumstances, industrial accidents involving recently serviced equipment, house fires in buildings with newly installed gas lines, disease outbreaks striking only insured families, and transportation accidents targeting specific individuals. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Yet Dr. Crawford faced a critical obstacle. He lacked authority to investigate crimes across state lines, and every local official he approached either dismissed his theories as coincidence or actively discouraged further inquiry. Sheriff Doherty had grown especially hostile, warning that spreading baseless accusations against respected businessmen could bring serious legal consequences. The threats came with a friendly smile, but Dr. Crawford understood the underlying message perfectly. Still, driven by professional duty and personal outrage, the physician continued documenting. Each suspicious death represented a destroyed family, orphaned children, and violated community trust. Someone, somewhere, needed to record the truth, even if justice seemed unattainable. What Dr. Crawford didn't realize was that his efforts had caught the attention of the Blackstone brothers. Isaiah's network of informants, including clerks, secretaries, and office workers throughout the region, had learned of the doctor's private investigation by early 1868. Dr. Crawford's persistent questions and detailed record-keeping represented exactly the type of complication the Blackstone Manual warned against. On March 15, 1868, Dr. Crawford failed to return home from evening rounds. His horse was found the next morning standing calmly beside Willow Creek, 2 miles east of town. His medical bag remained in the saddle, but the doctor himself was gone. The official search lasted 3 days and involved over 100 volunteers from Mill Creek Township and surrounding areas. Sheriff Doherty personally led the effort, expressing deep concern for such a respected community member. On the 4th day, Dr. Crawford's body was discovered floating in a deep pool nearly 6 miles downstream. His assistant, Dr. James Morrison, the county coroner, ruled that the physician had apparently suffered a heart attack while crossing the creek, fallen from his horse, and drowned in the swift current. It was a plausible explanation for a man in his 60s who worked long hours under considerable stress. The only suspicious detail was the disappearance of Dr. Crawford's private files, apparently removed from his office sometime between his disappearance and the discovery of his body. When questioned about the missing documents, Dr. Morrison explained he had taken the liberty of disposing of Dr. Crawford's personal papers to spare the family embarrassment. Some files, he said, contained unfounded theories and accusations that could damage reputations if made public. Dr. Morrison, a young physician fresh from medical school in Philadelphia, had been personally recruited by Isaiah Blackstone and was receiving substantial supplemental income for cooperating with Eternal Life Insurance. His willingness to conceal evidence and falsify official reports would prove invaluable to the Blackstone operation for decades to come. With Dr. Crawford eliminated and his evidence destroyed, the Blackstone brothers felt secure enough to expand into new territories and more ambitious schemes. But they had underestimated both the scale of their activities and the determination of those who would ultimately bring them down. The year 1870 marked a turning point for the Blackstone operation, though it would be decades before anyone fully grasped the significance of the changes that began unfolding that year. The catalyst was an unexpected opportunity arising from America's continued industrial expansion and the massive waves of European immigration following the Civil War. Hundreds of thousands of immigrants were flooding into Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia, seeking work in coal mines, steel mills, and railroad projects transforming the American landscape. These newcomers represented the ideal customer base for eternal life insurance. Men with dangerous jobs, limited English, few social ties, and desperate need to provide security for their families. Even more importantly, they came from countries with spotty or non-existent official records, making it nearly impossible for American authorities to verify backgrounds or trace relatives. Blackstone recognized the potential immediately. During a private family meeting in the spring of 1870, held in the privacy of their Elm Street mansion, he outlined a new phase of their operation that would dwarf all previous accomplishments. "Gentlemen," he told his brothers, "we have been thinking too small. We have been picking fruit from individual trees when we should be clearing entire orchards." The plan that emerged from that meeting was breathtaking in ambition and horrifying in its implications. Instead of targeting individual policyholders, the Blackstones would begin orchestrating mass-casualty events capable of killing dozens of insured workers simultaneously. Industrial disasters, transportation accidents, and building collapses could generate enormous payouts while appearing as tragic but understandable accidents. The key lay in meticulous planning and precise execution. They would identify locations where large numbers of policyholders worked or gathered, then engineer disasters that looked completely natural while maximizing casualties among insured individuals. Their first target was the Morgantown coal mine in West Virginia, where more than 60 eternal life policyholders were employed in various roles. The mine belonged to Harrison Industries, a company aggressively cutting costs to maximize profits during the post-war economic boom. Marcus, the engineer. Kowalski spent 3 months studying the operation, posing as a safety inspector and equipment specialist. His analysis showed the mine's ventilation system was dangerously inadequate, allowing hazardous methane levels to build in several deep shafts. On October 12, 1870, at 2:17 p.m. during peak afternoon shift, an explosion tore through the Morgantown mine. Attributed to methane ignition from a spark in mining equipment, the blast killed 47 workers instantly and trapped another dozen in collapsed tunnels. Only 8 survived, and 3 of those died soon after from injuries. 56 men dead. 38 eternal life policies, more than $76,000 in claim payments. The investigation was handled by state officials who saw no reason to suspect anything beyond criminal negligence by Harrison Industries. The company faced heavy fines and numerous civil lawsuits, but the explosion was officially classified as an industrial accident caused by poor safety measures and inadequate ventilation design. What investigators never discovered was that Marcus Kowalski had made subtle modifications to the ventilation system 3 weeks earlier. Changes that ensured methane would accumulate to explosive levels precisely where the highest concentrations of eternal life policyholders were. The success of Morgantown convinced the Blackstone brothers that mass-casualty events represented the future of their enterprise. Over the next 5 years, they orchestrated 8 major disasters across 4 states, claiming more than 300 lives and generating over $400,000 in insurance payouts. There was the 1872 collapse of the Riverside Bridge outside Pittsburgh during construction, killing 23 workers, 19 of whom carried eternal life policies. The official investigation blamed faulty design and substandard materials, never detecting that key support beams had been deliberately weakened with acid compounds. The Great Fire of Cumberland, Maryland, in 1874 consumed 6 city blocks and claimed 41 lives, 32 of them eternal life policyholders attending a company-sponsored social event at Merchants Hall. Patrick, the Torch, McGillicuddy had spent weeks preparing, strategically placing accelerants and blocking fire exits to ensure maximum casualties among the target group. The 1875 sinking of the steamboat Catherine Ann on the Ohio River was perhaps their most daring operation. The vessel, carrying immigrant workers to southern Ohio coal mines, went down in calm weather with the loss of 67 passengers and crew. 43 victims carried eternal life policies sold to them just days earlier by agents working the immigrant docks in Pittsburgh. Each disaster was investigated by local authorities who lacked the resources, expertise, or motivation to detect sophisticated sabotage. The Blackstones had mastered the art of exploiting 19th-century jurisdictional limitations and communication failures. More importantly, they had developed an increasingly sophisticated network of corruption extending far beyond small town sheriffs and rural coroners. State legislators, federal judges, railroad executives, mine owners, and shipping officials had all been recruited or compromised, creating a protective web that seemed unbreakable. By 1875, Eternal Life Insurance had become one of the largest providers in the eastern United States, with over 15,000 active policies and annual revenues surpassing $2 million. The Blackstone brothers were wealthy, respected members of society, known for charitable contributions and civic involvement. Morai served on the boards of 3 banks and had been appointed to a state commission studying industrial safety regulations. Isaiah was treasurer of the American Insurance Association and a frequent speaker at business conferences. Jebidiah had been elected to the Pennsylvania state legislature and was being discussed as a potential congressional candidate. Their success appeared to confirm everything America believed about free enterprise and individual achievement, living proof that even outsiders could rise to extraordinary heights through hard work, innovation, and dedication to customer needs. But success on such a massive scale inevitably drew attention from individuals with the skills and resources to recognize patterns local authorities had missed. Thomas Henley had spent 15 years investigating insurance fraud for Lloyd's of London before joining the New York Insurance Commission in 1873. His role involved analyzing industry statistics and identifying companies that presented regulatory risks to America's rapidly growing insurance market. Henley was a meticulous researcher with advanced training in mathematics and statistics, rare qualifications in an era when most investigations relied on intuition and basic record-keeping. His analytical methods had already exposed several major fraud schemes in New York and Massachusetts, saving insurers hundreds of thousands of dollars and sending dozens of criminals to prison. In late 1875, Henley began noticing statistical anomalies in mortality data reported by companies operating across multiple states. Most insurers showed mortality rates that varied predictably according to customer demographics and geographic areas. Companies insuring urban professionals had low death rates. Those serving industrial workers experienced higher claims, but within expected ranges. Eternal Life Insurance was different. Their mortality rates were not only well above industry averages, but fluctuated in patterns that seemed to correlate with specific dates and locations rather than seasonal or demographic trends. Even more puzzling, their death claims clustered around major industrial accidents and transportation disasters at statistically impossible rates. Henley spent months analyzing the data, cross-referencing newspaper accounts of major accidents with Eternal Life's claim payments. What he uncovered was so disturbing that he initially doubted his own calculations. Of the 8 major industrial disasters that occurred in Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, and Maryland between 1870 and 1875, Eternal Life policyholders accounted for an average of 68% of the fatalities. despite representing less than 15% of the workforce in those regions. The probability of such consistent over-representation happening by chance was less than 1 in 50,000. But statistical correlation, however strong, was not legal evidence. Henley needed proof of deliberate wrongdoing, and that would require investigating the Blackstone brothers directly. What Thomas Henley didn't realize was that his inquiries had already been detected by Isaiah's network of informants within the insurance industry. By the time Henley began his serious investigation, the Blackstone brothers were already planning to eliminate this new threat to their empire. The winter of 1876 would present the most dangerous challenge the Blackstone family had ever faced, and their response would reveal the true depths of their criminal organization. Thomas Henley was not a man easily intimidated. During his years with Lloyd's of London, he had faced threats from some of Europe's most dangerous criminals, survived an assassination attempt in Naples, and watched corrupt officials attempt to ruin his career when his investigations threatened powerful interests. But as he dug deeper into eternal life insurance, Henley began to realize he was confronting something far more sophisticated and lethal than anything he had encountered before. The breakthrough came in February 1876, when Henley discovered a connection hidden in plain sight while reviewing shipping manifests from the Catherine Ann disaster. He noticed that 43 of the 67 passengers had purchased their policies from the same agent, a man named Murphy, who worked the immigrant docks in Pittsburgh. According to employment records, Murphy had been with Eternal Life less than 3 months, yet had already sold over 200 policies to recent immigrants. Henley traveled to Pittsburgh to interview Murphy, only to learn the man had vanished 2 weeks after the Catherine Ann sinking, abandoning his boarding house room with no forwarding address. The landlord recalled that Murphy had left suddenly after a visit from a well-dressed gentleman in an expensive carriage. More interesting was what Murphy had left behind: a trunk containing detailed records of his sales activities, including personal information about customers that went far beyond standard insurance applications. Murphy had documented work schedules, travel plans, family relationships, and financial situations with the thoroughness of a police investigator. Hidden at the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in oiled cloth, Henley found something even more significant: correspondence between Murphy and his supervisors at Eternal Life, including coded telegrams that appeared to discuss special arrangements and elimination schedules. One telegram, dated just 3 days before the Catherine Ann disaster, was particularly damning. Harvest ready. 43 packages confirmed for River Route. Proceed with orchard plan. Payment upon completion. Henley had worked enough fraud cases to recognize criminal code when he saw it. Packages clearly referred to policyholders. River Route was the Ohio River Steamboat Service. And orchard plan seemed to be some kind of systematic killing scheme. But he needed more evidence and a fuller understanding of the Blackstone operation. Henley spent the next 6 months conducting the most thorough investigation of his career. He traveled to dozens of cities across 6 states, interviewing survivors of industrial accidents, relatives of disaster victims, and officials who had investigated suspicious deaths. He examined coroner reports, police files, insurance claims, and newspaper accounts, gradually constructing a comprehensive picture of 30 years of systematic murder. What emerged was a criminal enterprise of staggering proportions. The Blackstone brothers had not merely been killing individual policyholders. They had been engineering mass-casualty events designed to maximize insurance payouts while preserving plausible deniability. They had corrupted officials at every level of government, from small town sheriffs to federal judges. They had created a network of professional killers, saboteurs, and false witnesses operating across multiple states with military precision. Most horrifying of all, they had been eliminating entire families to prevent witnesses and minimize future complications. Henley's research suggested more than 3,000 people had died as a direct result of Blackstone family activities, including hundreds of women and children who posed no threat beyond their connection to insured workers. By August 1876, Henley had assembled enough evidence to support criminal charges against the Blackstone brothers that could send them to the gallows. But he also understood that his investigation had made him a marked man. The first warning came as a fire that consumed his hotel room in Cleveland while he interviewed witnesses to the Riverside Bridge collapse. Henley had been staying at the Imperial Hotel for 3 days. The fire started on his final night, conveniently in his room, while he was at dinner downstairs. The hotel manager apologized profusely, blaming a malfunctioning gas lamp. But Henley noticed that only his room had been affected, and that his investigative files had been thoroughly searched before the fire began. The second warning was more direct, outside the Pittsburgh courthouse, where he had been examining Catherine Ann disaster records. A well-dressed, soft-spoken man approached him and politely suggested Henley consider accepting a generous consulting position with a railroad company in California. The position, the man explained, would require immediate and indefinite relocation. Mr. Henley, the stranger said with a smile that never reached his eyes, some investigations can be very dangerous to one's health. Perhaps it would be wise to pursue opportunities in a more hospitable climate. Henley declined. The third warning arrived via telegram at his hotel in Wheeling, West Virginia. Your wife Margaret sends her regards from New York. She hopes you will conclude your business quickly and return home safely. Some neighborhoods can be very dangerous for ladies traveling alone. Henley's blood ran cold. Margaret was supposed to be visiting her sister in Boston, nowhere near New York. The message was unmistakable. The Blackstone brothers knew where his wife was and were prepared to harm her if he continued. But Thomas Henley had not survived 15 years investigating dangerous criminals by retreating when threatened. Instead of backing down, he accelerated his timeline and prepared for the most perilous phase of his investigation: direct confrontation with the Blackstone brothers themselves. Henley arranged to meet federal prosecutors in Washington, D.C., presenting his evidence to Assistant Attorney General William Morrison in September 1876. Morrison, a veteran prosecutor who had handled complex fraud cases during post-Civil War Reconstruction, was initially skeptical. The scale of the alleged conspiracy seemed almost unbelievable. Mr. Henley, Morrison said after reviewing the files, "You're asking me to believe that 3 businessmen have orchestrated the murders of thousands of people across multiple states over nearly 20 years, all while maintaining the appearance of respected citizens and successful entrepreneurs. Do you understand how extraordinary these allegations are?" "I understand perfectly, sir," Henley replied. "But I also understand that extraordinary crimes require extraordinary evidence. And that's exactly what I'm providing." Morrison spent 2 weeks reviewing Henley's documentation with a team of federal investigators. The evidence was compelling but largely circumstantial: statistical patterns, suspicious coincidences, and coded communications suggesting criminal activity. Difficult to prove in court. "We need more," Morrison concluded. "We need direct evidence of criminal planning, documentary proof of the conspiracy, or testimony from someone inside the organization. What you've assembled justifies an investigation, but not convictions." Henley had anticipated this response. "Give me 2 more months," he said. "I believe I can get what we need." What Henley planned was the most dangerous gambit of his career. He would attempt to infiltrate the Blackstone organization by posing as a corrupt official seeking to join their network. Using forged credentials and a carefully constructed false identity, Henley approached Sheriff Doherty in Mill Creek Township, claiming to be a federal court clerk who could provide advance warning of any government investigations into insurance fraud. He offered to sell information about pending federal cases in exchange for a substantial fee and potential partnership opportunities. Sheriff Doherty, who had been taking Blackstone money for more than 15 years, was intrigued but cautious. He arranged a meeting between Henley and Isaiah Blackstone, who would decide whether this potential recruit was genuine or dangerous. The meeting took place on October 23, 1876, in the back room of McGinty's Tavern in Mill Creek Township. Isaiah arrived with 2 bodyguards, men whose hard faces and watchful eyes suggested they were more than simple employees. Henley had prepared meticulously, studying federal court procedures and memorizing names and backgrounds of officials who might plausibly be corrupted. He presented himself as Walter Henderson, a clerk in the Philadelphia Federal Courthouse, with access to sensitive information about upcoming investigations. Isaiah questioned him for over an hour, probing his knowledge of court procedures, his reasons for betraying his oath, and his understanding of the risks involved in dealing with the Blackstone family. "Mr. Henderson," Isaiah finally said, "you seem to understand our business remarkably well for a court clerk. Tell me, what exactly do you think we do here in Mill Creek Township?" It was a test, and Henley knew his answer would determine whether he lived or died in that tavern back room. "I think you found a way to turn tragedy into profit," Henley replied carefully. "I think you understand that sometimes unfortunate events create opportunities for those prepared to take advantage of them, and that you've been very successful at encouraging government officials look the other way when questions smiled, for the questions might arise." Sir Sell for the first time during the meeting. "That's a very diplomatic way of describing our operations, Mr. Henderson. But diplomacy is a luxury we can't always afford. Sometimes we need people who can be more direct." "I understand," Henley said, "and I'm prepared to be as direct as necessary, provided the compensation is adequate." Isaiah studied him for a long moment, then nodded to one of his bodyguards. "Marcus will escort you to a private location where we can discuss specific arrangements. I think you'll find our terms quite generous." Henley followed Marcus Kowalski, the same engineer who had sabotaged the Morgantown mine and Riverside Bridge, to a warehouse on the outskirts of town. Inside, he discovered the true headquarters of the Blackstone criminal organization. The warehouse contained detailed maps of 6 states, marked with pins showing major industrial facilities, transportation hubs, and population centers. Filing cabinets lined the walls, filled with dossiers on thousands of eternal life policyholders, including work schedules, family relationships, and personal vulnerabilities. Most chilling was a large table covered with architectural drawings and engineering schematics plans for scoring bridge supports, chemical formulas for accelerants and poisons, and detailed layouts of coal mines showing optimal locations for explosive charges. "Welcome to the real Eternal Life Insurance Company," Isaiah said, gesturing around the warehouse. "This is where we plan the tragedies that make our business so profitable." Over the next hour, Isaiah gave Henley a comprehensive overview of their operations, how they identified target populations, planned mass-casualty events, corrupted local officials, and eliminated potential witnesses. He detailed their network of professional killers, detection avoidance methods, and strategies for expanding into new territories. It was everything Henley needed to dismantle the Blackstone empire. But he still faced the critical challenge of surviving long enough to deliver the information to federal authorities. Just when we thought we'd seen the worst, the horror in Mill Creek Township deepens. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support the channel, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next. Isaiah's explanation was interrupted by the arrival of Morai and Jebediah Blackstone, who had come to personally evaluate their potential new recruit. Morai, now 59 and carrying the commanding presence of a man accustomed to absolute authority, studied Henley with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey. "My brother tells me you might be useful to our organization," Morai said. "But usefulness requires trust, and trust requires demonstration. We have a small project that needs attention, a test of your commitment to our shared interests." Morai handed Henley a photograph of a middle-aged man with kind eyes and graying hair. "This is Dr. Marcus Webb, a physician in Johntown who has been asking inconvenient questions about some of our former policy holders. Dr. Webb seems to believe certain industrial accidents in his area have been artificially induced. He's been corresponding with officials in Harrisburg, sharing theories about patterns in local mortality statistics." Henley's blood ran cold as he realized what was being requested. "Dr. Webb has become a complication that requires resolution," Morai continued. "We need someone with federal connections to ensure his concerns are dismissed by the appropriate authorities. Can we count on your cooperation?" "Of course." Henley managed, though his mouth had gone dry. "What specifically do you need me to do?" "Dr. Webb is scheduled to testify before a state legislative committee next week." Jebediah interjected. "He believes he has evidence of systematic insurance fraud connected to industrial accidents in western Pennsylvania. We need that testimony discredited before it can damage our reputation." Morai leaned forward, his steel, gray eyes boring into Henley's. "More importantly, we need Dr. Webb to understand that pursuing this investigation would be extremely dangerous to his health and the well-being of his family. Sometimes a word from the right federal official can be very persuasive in encouraging people to reconsider their civic obligations." Henley realized he was being asked to participate in the intimidation over elimination. A man whose own crime was attempting to expose the truth about the Blackstone murders. It was a test of loyalty, but also an opportunity to gather more evidence while potentially saving Dr. Webb's life. "I can handle this," Henley said, "but I'll need detailed information about Dr. Webb's evidence and testimony to determine the best approach for discrediting him." Isaiah produced a thick file containing copies of Dr. Webb's correspondence, research notes, and transcripts of preliminary interviews with state investigators. As Henley reviewed the documents, he saw that Dr. Webb had independently reached many of the same conclusions about the Blackstone operation. Though his evidence was less comprehensive than Henley's, more importantly, Dr. Webb was scheduled to testify on November 15, 1876, less than 3 weeks away. Dr. Webb must be neutralized before that hearing, Morai stated flatly. If his testimony becomes public, it could trigger federal investigations that would be very inconvenient for our business. Henley nodded, understanding he had perhaps 2 weeks to complete his infiltration, gather the final evidence he needed, and escape with his life before the Blackstones discovered his true identity. What he didn't realize was, that his time was already running out. Isaiah Blackstone was a cautious man who trusted no one completely, and he had already begun investigating Walter Henderson's background. Within days, he would learn that no such person existed in the Philadelphia federal court system, and that Thomas Henley had been asking questions about eternal life insurance in multiple cities across several states. The final confrontation between Henley and the Blackstone family was approaching, and only one side would survive. November 8, 1876. The autumn morning broke gray and bitter in Mill Creek Township, with frost coating windows along Elm Street and smoke rising from chimneys throughout the valley. Thomas Henley had spent a sleepless night in his hotel room, reviewing evidence and preparing for what he knew would be the most dangerous day of his life. Isaiah Blackstone had sent word the previous evening that Walter Henderson was expected at the warehouse at 900 sharp for a final briefing on the Dr. Webb situation. The message had been delivered by Marcus Kowalski, whose cold smile and meaningful glances suggested something had shifted in the Blackstones' assessment of their new recruit. Henley had used the overnight hours to prepare multiple copies of his evidence, sealing them in envelopes addressed to federal prosecutors, newspaper editors, and insurance commissioners across the eastern United States. If he didn't survive the morning, at least the truth about the Blackstone crimes would eventually reach those with the power to act. At 1830, Henley made his way to the warehouse on the outskirts of town, carrying a leather satchel containing both forged federal court documents and a loaded Colt revolver he hoped he wouldn't need. The streets were mostly empty at that hour, with only a few workers heading to the Foundry and railroad yard. The warehouse appeared deserted when Henley arrived, but smoke rose from the chimney and lamplight flickered in the windows. As he approached the main entrance, Marcus Kowalski emerged from the shadows, accompanied by two men Henley didn't recognize. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson," Kowalski said with mock politeness. "The Blackstone brothers are waiting inside. I think you'll find today's meeting very educational." The tone and positioning of the men told Henley everything. His cover had been blown, and he was walking into a trap. But he had come too far to retreat now, and Dr. Webb's life might depend on what happened in the next few hours. Inside the warehouse, Henley found all three Blackstone brothers waiting around the large table covered with operational maps and planning documents. But the atmosphere was entirely different from his previous visit. Gone was the welcoming tone and collegial discussion. Instead, Moray, Isaiah, and Jebidiah watched him with the cold calculation of men preparing to dispose of a problem. "Mr. Henderson," Moray said, not bothering to rise. "Or should I say Mr. Thomas Henley of the New York Insurance Commission." Henley's hand moved instinctively toward his concealed weapon, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about." Isaiah laughed, a sound without warmth or humor. "Please, Mr. Henley, we've known about your investigation for weeks. Did you really think you could infiltrate our organization without us discovering your true identity? We have contacts in every major city from Boston to Chicago. Your reputation as an insurance investigator precedes you." Jebidiah leaned forward, his political smile replaced by genuine malice. "The question isn't whether you're Thomas Henley. The question is what we're going to do with you, now that you've learned so much about our business operations." Henley realized further deception was pointless. "What I've learned is that you're murderers on a scale that defies comprehension. 3,000 people dead so you could collect insurance money. Entire families eliminated to cover your tracks. You're not businessmen. You're monsters." Moray's eyes flashed with anger. but his voice remained controlled. "Monsters. We're entrepreneurs, Mr. Henley. We identified a market inefficiency and developed innovative solutions to exploit it. The insurance industry was built on the premise that most policyholders would pay premiums for years without filing claims. We simply found ways to ensure our customers' premiums generated immediate returns." "Be murdering them," Henley said flatly. "By accelerating natural economic processes," Isaiah corrected. "Industrial workers die in accidents every day. Immigrants succumb to disease and misfortune constantly. We merely provided focus and efficiency to inevitable outcomes." Jebidiah stood and walked to a filing cabinet, withdrawing a thick folder. "The beautiful thing about our system, Mr. Henley, is its scalability. We've proven that mass-casualty events can be engineered with minimal risk of detection. Coal mine explosions, bridge collapses, steamboat accidents, all tragic but explicable within the normal parameters of industrial life." "What's your point?" Henley asked, though he suspected he didn't want the answer. Morai smiled for the first time since Henley's arrival. "Our point, Mr. Henley, is that we're expanding our operations. The techniques we've perfected in Pennsylvania can be applied anywhere in America. We're planning to establish eternal life insurance offices in California, Texas, and the Dakota Territory. Within 10 years, we expect to process more than 1,000 death claims annually." The scope of their ambition was breathtaking in its evil. They weren't merely running a criminal enterprise. They were planning to industrialize murder on a national scale. "You're insane," Henley said. "You can't possibly believe you can continue this without detection. The statistical patterns will be managed by experts we've recruited from the finest universities." Isaiah interrupted. "We've learned from our mistakes, Mr. Henley. Future operations will include sophisticated mathematical modeling to ensure our mortality rates remain within acceptable parameters. We're not amateur criminals stumbling through trial and error. We're professionals implementing proven methodologies." Henley felt a chill unrelated to the November weather. The Blackstone brothers weren't just killers. They were systematic, intelligent killers who had perfected their methods over decades. If they succeeded in expanding nationally, they could potentially murder tens of thousands, while maintaining the facade of legitimate business. "But first," Morai continued, "we need to address the immediate problems created by your investigation, Dr. Webb's testimony, your evidence files, and your personal knowledge of our operations." Marcus Kowalski and his associates had moved to block the warehouse exits while the brothers spoke. Henley was trapped, but not helpless. "My evidence has already been delivered to federal prosecutors," Henley lied smoothly. "Killing me won't stop the investigation." "Actually, it will," Jebidiah said with his politician's confidence. "We've been monitoring your activities for weeks, Mr. Henley. We know exactly what evidence you've gathered and where you stored it. Your hotel room was searched last night while you slept. Quite soundly, thanks to the laudanum our associate added to your dinner. Your evidence files have been confiscated, and any correspondence you sent to federal authorities has been intercepted by our contacts in the Postal Service." Henley's heart sank. If they had destroyed his evidence and intercepted his communications, Dr. Webb would testify without knowing the danger he faced, and the Blackstone operation would continue unimpeded. But Thomas Henley had not survived 15 years of dangerous investigations by relying on a single plan. While the Blackstones were searching his hotel room and intercepting his mail, Henley had been executing a backup strategy they couldn't have anticipated.
"You may have found my evidence files,"
Henley said. But you didn't find everything. Morai's confident expression flickered slightly. What do you mean? Henley reached slowly into his satchel, withdrawing not his weapon but a small leather journal. This contains detailed records of every conversation I've had with your organization, including everything you've told me about your operations, methods, and expansion plans. It also lists the names and locations of every corrupted official in your network, every professional killer you employ, and every planned operation you've discussed. Isaiah's face went pale. That's impossible. We searched everything. You searched everything I wanted you to find, Henley replied. But you didn't search the things I mailed to myself under false names at post office boxes in 6 different cities. This journal is just one copy. There are 5 others, along with photographs of your operational maps and copies of your correspondence with agents and killers. The warehouse fell silent, except for the sound of wind rattling the windows. The Blackstone brothers were realizing their perfect criminal organization had been completely compromised by a single persistent investigator. Even if you kill me here, Henley continued, those packages will be collected according to a predetermined schedule. By Christmas, every federal prosecutor and newspaper editor on the East Coast will have complete documentation of your crimes. Morai was the first to recover. You're bluffing. No investigator would risk exposing evidence to theft or loss by mailing it to random locations. You're right, Henley agreed. No normal investigator would take that risk. But I'm not investigating normal criminals. I'm investigating murderers who have killed thousands and corrupted officials at every level of government. Against an enemy like that, extraordinary measures are justified. The truth was that Henley had indeed mailed evidence packages to secure locations. But he had taken one additional precaution the Blackstones couldn't have discovered. He had arranged for his wife, Margaret, to travel to Washington, D.C., under an assumed name, carrying the most crucial evidence directly to Assistant Attorney General Morrison. If Henley failed to return to New York by November 15th, Margaret had instructions to deliver the evidence and request immediate federal intervention. The telegram about her being in New York had been a deliberate bluff to test whether the Blackstones were monitoring his personal communications. So here's what's going to happen, Henley said, his voice steady despite the mortal danger. You're going to let me walk out of this warehouse. Cease all operations immediately, allow Dr. Webb to give his testimony without interference, and surrender yourselves to federal authorities for prosecution. Morai's laugh was harsh and bitter. Mr. Henley, you seem to misunderstand your situation. Even if you've hidden evidence as you claim, you won't be alive to see it delivered. Dead men can't testify about what they've discovered. But living men can, Henley replied, and I'm not the only person who knows about your crimes. That statement was partially true and partially bluff. Dr. Webb had reached similar conclusions about the Blackstone operation, though he lacked Henley's comprehensive evidence. More importantly, Assistant Attorney General Morrison was already aware of the investigation and would certainly act if Henley disappeared under suspicious circumstances. But Henley's main protection was something the Blackstones couldn't have anticipated. The warehouse meeting was being observed by federal agents who had followed him from his hotel. Morrison had been sufficiently concerned about Henley's safety to assign a small team of investigators to monitor the final phase of his infiltration. They were positioned outside with instructions to intervene if Henley's life appeared in immediate danger. The sound of footsteps on the warehouse roof signaled that intervention was about to begin. The footsteps were followed by the crash of breaking glass as federal agents rappelled through the skylights, landing with military precision. 3 armed men in dark coats surrounded the Blackstone brothers, while 2 more secured the exits, trapping Marcus Kowalski and his associates before they could escape. "Federal agents?" shouted the lead investigator, a tall man with iron gray hair and the bearing of a veteran soldier. "Nobody move." The Blackstone brothers' faces showed different reactions to this sudden reversal. Morai maintained his commanding presence even with a federal rifle pointed at his chest, his steel, gray eyes calculating odds and possibilities. Isaiah appeared stunned, as if his mathematical mind couldn't process how his carefully planned operation had been compromised so completely. Jebediah, ever the politician, immediately raised his hands and began speaking in the smooth, conciliatory tone he used with hostile voters. "Gentlemen, there seems to be some misunderstanding here. We're respected businessmen conducting a routine meeting with Mr. Henderson about insurance matters. Whatever you think you've witnessed." "We've witnessed enough," the lead agent interrupted. "Agent Daniel Foster, U.S. Treasury Department." "Thomas Henley, are you injured?" "I'm fine, Agent Foster," Henley replied, though his hands shook slightly from the tension of the past hour. "But you'll want to secure the evidence in this warehouse before anyone has a chance to destroy it." Foster nodded to his men, who immediately began collecting the operational maps, filing cabinets, and planning documents that filled the warehouse. The scope of evidence was staggering, detailed records of 37 years of systematic murder, corruption, and fraud that would take months to fully analyze. As federal agents placed the Blackstone brothers in shackles, Morai finally spoke directly to Henley. "You think you've won something here, Mr. Henley, but you have no idea what you've unleashed. Our organization extends far beyond these 3 men and this single warehouse. We have associates in a dozen states, contacts in federal offices, and resources you can't imagine." "Then I guess we'll have plenty of work to do," Foster replied grimly. "Starting with the list of corrupted officials Mr. Henley discovered during his investigation. The arrests marked only the beginning of the largest criminal investigation in American history up to that point. Over the following 18 months, federal agents would arrest more than 200 people connected to the Blackstone conspiracy, including sheriffs, coroners, judges, mine owners, railroad executives, and dozens of professional killers and saboteurs. The trials, which began in Philadelphia in March 1877, revealed the full scope of the Blackstone empire to a horrified American public. Newspaper coverage was extensive and graphic, with reporters struggling to convey the sheer scale of the crimes to readers who could barely comprehend such systematic evil. Evidence presented during the trials included detailed documentation of 63 mass-casualty events orchestrated by the Blackstone organization between 1859 and 1876. These disasters had claimed the lives of 247 people, including 1923 primary policyholders and 924 family members eliminated to prevent witnesses or complications. The financial scope was equally staggering. The Blackstones had collected more than $4.2 million in fraudulent insurance claims, while paying only $1,890 in bribes, equipment, and operational expenses. Their net profit from 17 years of systematic murder exceeded $3.3 million, an astronomical sum equivalent to more than $80 million in today's currency. Perhaps most chilling were the expansion plans found in Isaiah's personal files. The brothers had been preparing to establish operations in California, Texas, Colorado, and the Dakota Territory, with projected annual revenues exceeding $10 million by 1885. Had their plans succeeded, they might have murdered tens of thousands of Americans while building one of the nation's largest fortunes. Moriah Blackstone was convicted on 47 counts of murder and sentenced to death. He was executed by hanging in Philadelphia on September 12, 1878, maintaining his innocence to the end and claiming he was a victim of government persecution designed to suppress business innovation. Isaiah Blackstone received a similar sentence but died in prison before his execution date, apparently from a heart attack brought on by the stress of incarceration. Some suspected suicide, though no evidence ever supported that theory. Jebediah Blackstone, whose political connections and cooperation with prosecutors earned him a reduced sentence, was convicted of conspiracy and sentenced to life imprisonment. He died in Eastern State Penitentiary in 1894, having spent his seminary in Virginia, having spent his final years writing detailed confessions that provided investigators with additional evidence about the organization's methods and scope. The corrupted officials connected to the conspiracy faced varying fates. Sheriff Marcus Doherty was convicted of accepting bribes and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Dr. James Morrison, who had falsified coroner reports, was stripped of his medical license and sentenced to 15 years. Several judges and federal officials were impeached and removed from office. The professional killers and saboteurs proved more difficult to prosecute. Many had fled to Canada or Mexico when news of the arrests broke. Marcus, the engineer, Kowalski, was captured in Toronto, extradited, and executed in West Virginia in 1879 for his role in the Morgantown mine disaster. Patrick, the Torch, McGillicuddy was never found, though reports placed him in locations from California to South America. Dr. Marcus Webb, the Johnstown physician whose scheduled testimony had precipitated the final confrontation, played a crucial role in the prosecutions. His independent research provided corroborating evidence for many of Henley's discoveries and helped establish the timeline of Blackstone crimes in western Pennsylvania. The Eternal Life Insurance Company was dissolved by federal order, with its remaining assets used to compensate families of verified victims. Identifying and compensating all victims took more than 5 years and required creating a special federal commission to unravel the complex web of crimes. Thomas Henley was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Rutherford B. Hayes in recognition of his courage and persistence in exposing the conspiracy. He continued his career as an insurance investigator, but never, ever again encountered a case approaching the scope and horror of the Blackstone murders. In his later writings, Henley reflected on the broader implications of the case. The Blackstone conspiracy had succeeded for so long not because of superior criminal intelligence, but because of systematic corruption that permeated American institutions at every level. Local officials had been bought, state authorities intimidated, and federal oversight had been minimal. The case led to significant reforms in insurance regulation, criminal investigation procedures, and interstate law enforcement cooperation. The creation of standardized mortality statistics and improved communication between state and federal authorities made it much harder for similar conspiracies to operate undetected. But perhaps the most important lesson of the Blackstone case, one Americans have had to relearn repeatedly throughout history, is the danger of assuming that respectability and success are synonymous with honesty and morality. The Blackstone brothers had been pillars of their community, devout churchgoers, successful businessmen, and trusted public servants. Their crimes were hidden not just by corruption and intimidation, but by the natural human tendency to assume that prosperous, respectable people must be fundamentally decent. For 37 years, the good people of Mill Creek Township and dozens of other communities had trusted the Blackstone family with their most precious possessions, their lives, their family security, and their faith in American institutions. That trust had been repaid with systematic murder on a scale that wouldn't be equaled in American criminal history until the organized crime syndicates of the early 20th century. The Blackstone family graves in Mill Creek Township Cemetery remain unmarked to this day, though local residents still speak in hushed tones about the events of 1876. The Eternal Life Insurance Company, building on Main Street, has housed various businesses over the decades, but none have lasted more than a few years. Some say the building is cursed. Others simply note that it's difficult to attract customers to a location associated with such horror. The warehouse where the final confrontation took place was demolished in 1881, and the site is now occupied by a small park with a memorial to the victims of the Blackstone conspiracy. The memorial lists the names of 847 confirmed victims, though historians believe the actual number may have been significantly higher. This mystery reminds us that the greatest evils often wear the most respectable faces, and that the price of safety is constant vigilance against those who would exploit our trust for their own murderous gain. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed about the Blackstone conspiracy? Or do you think some secrets went to the grave with the brothers? Leave your thoughts in the comments and share your theories. If you enjoyed this tale and want more dark historical mysteries like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves uncovering the hidden horrors of America's past. These stories need to be told, and together we can ensure that the victims of history's greatest crimes are never forgotten. See you in the next video, where we'll explore another dark chapter that powerful people tried to erase from the historical record.